Welcome everyone. Special episode today. We're back with Aubrey DeGray, longevity stream number 2. Very excited. We've had a few other longevity streams as well. We had one with Brent and Allie and SJ and Crypto Coffee and everyone the other day. I did some shows, did some content with Kincaid Honey as well. I did a whole series. I clipped it out. He did the stream, and then I kind of clipped out and made a series on all this, basically busting all the myths of, why you don't want to live forever, what all the problems that would come from it. All that. I can put that playlist in the chat as well if you guys want to check it out. So this is the interest that has been of mine for a while, ever since Richard, has talked about it for years. I think that's maybe one of his future plans, hopefully. Maybe something like the Heart Foundation will come around, funding these important problems that really make an impact in the world. And Aubrey is one of the few people who's literally been working on it for a very long time, even decades even. And written books on it. And there's a lot of really important people working on this problem as well. But Aubrey, we have him back on the show for the second time, and very excited to get to it. Put your questions in the chat. I've got an agenda. I got a few things I want to go through. I've taken some questions from the community as well. I've got those to pose as Aubrey as well. But again, if you have any questions, put them in the chat. I'll put them in queue. We'll try to get to as many as we can, but we're going for about an hour or so. So if we have time, we'll get to as many as we can. Otherwise, you can always hit him up on Twitter. He's very responsive. Seems to be on Twitter from time to time as well. But we got a lot of stuff to talk about. So I want to kind of keep this focused on a few key topics and see if we get the most out of it. So without further ado, welcome back to the show, Aubrey DeGray, Dr. Aubrey DeGray.
Hello there. Thanks for having me back. Of
course. Last time we had a great conversation, went over a lot of different topics. And I know it's been about 6 months or so. So there's always some new stuff going around. We're getting to the Dublin longevity declaration as well. That's something that I saw recently and signed. And it's just been this wonderful world we live in. Just solving these type of problems. It's one of those. We can talk about how it's underfunded. We can talk about how not enough people will care about it or believe in it or otherwise. But it's just dedicating your life and your work and stuff to that. It just seems so profound. And I don't know, for people looking at a problem to solve out there, this is one of the key ones to do, isn't it?
Well, I think so. I mean, that's why I'm working on it. I decided at a very early point in my life that I wanted to work on, the most important problems for humanity. And I ended up working on this one, which I think definitely is out there as the number one problem. I'm obviously quite proud to have been able to contribute over these years, and I have no intention of slowing down for quite a while.
That's great to hear. I mean, it's again, all these problems in the world, a lot of people are working on the ones that they think are most important. And it's again, when I talk to people, we talked about this a little bit before last time, when you talk to people about it, it's just one of those fantasies. It's one of those, yeah, that'd be nice, but everyone before me, that never happened to them. I'm going to die at, whatever the average age, hopefully a little bit above it, just like everyone else. It's almost like investing in it almost feels like at a common level of like just throwing your money away. Maybe we'll start off with that. Like, what is the state of the art in anti-aging, and why is it why is it worth investing in?
Well, I guess the answer to that depends on what definition of the word investing one is using. So investing one's time, or investing one's money, or investing one's lifestyle or whatever. So of course a lot of people are paying close attention to their health as they get older and trying to minimize the rate at which that health declines, or the time until that health starts to decline. And, that's definitely laudable. I applaud that. However, it's extremely important never to lose sight of the fact that the things we can do today, whether it's in terms of lifestyle or diet or other choices, are really pretty feeble in terms of the actual impact. Not only that, different people need different things, because essentially everything we have right now depends on somehow optimizing one's own metabolism, and different people have different types of metabolism. So before we went live, you and I were just talking about exercise, how like you feel that you get a substantial benefit from doing a substantial amount of exercise, whereas I'm one of those people, or those disgustingly lucky people who don't even need to, and nothing seems to happen. And same applies to diet and supplements and so on. Different things work for different people. But even if you are optimized for your own particular metabolism, there's only a minimal amount we can get, the minimal amount of benefit we can get. So Coming back to the other definition of investment of money or time, of course, that's all about hastening the arrival of things that don't yet exist, which is, of course, what I focus on. I'm a researcher. And the impact at the moment of that investment is quite substantial, especially if one looks at it in terms of the humanitarian benefit, not just in the terms of the benefit for oneself or one's loved ones. Every day that we bring things forward is 100,000 lives saved, and that's quite easy to get out of bed for. So, yeah, I mean, my feeling is that you just need to look at your circumstances, what you're good at, especially what you're good at that other people, not many other people are good at, and prioritize those things. So that may be donating financially to LEV Foundation, my foundation, or to elsewhere in the movement. It may be investing in startup companies or whatever. It may be investing time, such as in advocacy, especially for someone like you who has a podcast. Getting someone like me on air is of course very important for raising awareness and understanding of this field, not only in terms of understanding of the nature of the severity and nature of the problem, but also in terms of the rate at which we are making progress in solving the problem, and therefore the plausible time frame in which we may actually have much greater impact in postponing the health problems of late life than what we could do today.
Yeah, definitely a lot of different ways to do it. Like you said, I like talking about it, getting more exposure. That's just one of the things that's just, I want to, I'm going to be very happy the day I see people finally get it. Like there's a just a handful of people, a very small fraction of the population who understands like, hey, this is not only a problem worth working on, it is a solvable problem through all the stuff you went over for years and years, and all the research and all the different maintenance and therapies and stuff you talked about. And that's going to be a glorious day when we finally get the bulk of the population saying, hey, let's here biotech. It's kind of like saving people. This is working on living longer, health span, not just being living to be 500 and decrepit and in a wheelchair type of thing. But like, hey, like let's instead of stopping, if you like running and stopping running when you're 60, 70, 80, maybe you stop running when you're 250 or something like that. Like those are things that really affect people's lives, and that's. I always think about how I first got interested in it through Richard, of course, and him talking about it and just being so passionate about the number one problem to solve, just as you mentioned. But I want to get into too, like what we talked 6 months ago. Has anything changed? Has anything been like any new research or otherwise developments that have happened in 2023 that are exciting enough to push things forward?
Well, sure. I mean, first of all, on the research side, absolutely. Every week, every month, there is progress being made. As most of your audience will know, I ran my most recent conference in this area just 2 months ago in August, less than 2 months ago, and that was in Dublin, as we are doing every year now. An important thing to mention is that that our conferences, LEV Foundation's conferences, are not the only ones at all. There's like a conference a month at the moment in this space, whereas 20 years ago when I started running conferences, literally mine were the only ones that were focused on doing something about aging, and even my ones only happened every alternate year. So that's a pretty damn good measure of how things have accelerated. If we look for specific things, of course, the videos of all the talks I think all of them now are online at Longevity Summit Dublin on YouTube. And if I had to pick out a single one that blew my mind the most, it would be Vlad Vitok's talk. He is the CEO of Maya Biotechnology, MAIA. And he talked about a new drug for treating cancer that acts on the telomere, and as such has potential to be effective against like 90% of all human cancers. And it seems to be going extraordinarily well. I mean, I've obviously been working very hard to help Maya move forward and get them investment and so on. But the results that Vlad showed in Dublin were even more impressive than what he'd shown before. I was blown away. So yeah, that's yes. Thank you very much, Max. That is the page where all the talks are listed, and that's the one I was talking about, the one you have your cursor over. The point here is, of course, that it's not just the science that's moving forward. One other thing that I kind of soft announced in Dublin at the gala dinner was something called what's now become called the Dublin Longevity Declaration. And I guess the audience will probably want to know a bit more about that, because I only soft announced it, as I say, and the real thing got launched only a few days ago. Thank you for putting the URL up. It was conceived really by myself and the person who actually runs the Longevity Summit Dublin on the ground, Martin O'Dea, who is also the vice chair of LEV Foundation, along with another very prominent biogerontologist, Brian Kennedy, who runs the Centre for Healthy Aging in Singapore, having previously run the Buck Institute. He actually was responsible for most of the text originally, with a number of edits from myself and a few other luminaries in the field. And the key thing about this, the key thing that makes it a real watershed moment, is that it's a very much stronger statement of optimism from the people who are really the acknowledged mainstream experts in the field. It's not just me, it's not just this one crazy guy with the unintelligible accent and the long beard anymore. This is the bulk of the mainstream community signing up. So we started out by actually getting kind of advanced signatures from lots of luminaries, something like 60 or 70 people who are very recognized experts in the field. And, well, you can see the list at the top there. There are very few people who said no, and most of them said no because they basically just have taken a vow never to sign anything. Basically, that's how we began. And the next thing we did was we launched it to so that anyone can sign up. And so there are now, as you can see, 1,400 or more signatures. That's just in a couple of days. And of course, we are pushing it out to the media as much as possible. We are hoping very much to maintain momentum here. We were somewhat inspired by something that the AI community did a few months ago, in which a large number of experts in the AI community called for a 6-month moratorium on all AI research in order to kind of take a deep breath and figure out how dangerous AI actually is, and how to mitigate those dangers. And we'd very much like to get to the point of having more signatures than they got. So let's see how we can get on. But the key point here is that historically, when one has conversations with decision makers, policymakers, funders about the value of putting money into this field, there are two things that one has to persuade them of. Number one, one has to persuade them that even a modest amount of success in postponing the health problems of aging will have enormous benefits, whether it's humanitarian benefits or economic benefits or whatever, right? And that turns out to be relatively straightforward. I mean, yes, some people will say, oh dear, isn't aging a blessing in disguise? Doesn't, what dictators live forever? Doesn't death give meaning to life? Where will we put all the people? But as you and probably most of the audience know, the answers to those questions are actually rather easy to provide. And sure enough, if you're talking to someone who's got a few brain cells to rub together, you can persuade them, indeed, that aging is not a blessing in disguise. So that's fine. But then there's the other thing that we have to persuade them of, which is that a manageable amount of investment in the research, the early stage research that's being done in laboratories around the world, including at LEV Foundation, of course, will actually deliver some progress in postponing the health problems of late life. And that's a much harder sell, simply because since the beginning of civilization, people have been brought up to believe that aging is woven into the fabric of the universe. And it's not like diseases, it's something that everybody gets, it's universal and, inevitable and immutable. And off limits to medicine, essentially, is what people are intuitively thinking. So it requires a consensus statement from the mainstream academic community, the acknowledged experts, to say, no, that is actually complete nonsense. And aging not only is potentially amenable to medical control, we are within striking distance of actually achieving that. And therefore, the more money gets thrown into the thing, the more difference we can make, the more lives we can save. We have that statement now as a fulcrum for all manner of calls to action around the world. And that's what we want to use it for.
Is it, and I just wanted to show the playlist that I have on the channel as well, to just trying to debunk a lot of stuff. Me and Kincaid High went and did a stream on this, and just all the different reasons, as you mentioned, people, just feel like it's just one of those things that happens. It's natural, right? Like, do you think that if it's because it kind of feels like you're born with this ticking clock, and you don't know when it's going to, when your life is going to be over, but it's going to be over sometime. If it was that kind of like mental model, instead of, hey, there's some disease and we just got to find a cure for it, that seems like a much more, it's just, we just need to, I want to say, we just need some kind of cure for this thing, and we all going to go work on it, and then it'll be solved, instead of, hey, we're just born with this clock. Is it just not like a tenable, like a tangible type problem? Is that hard to wrap people's head around?
Yeah, it really is. I mean, and so the only thing that's happened historically is that society has taken what I'd like to call a salami approach to this. They look at individual aspects of aging and they give them disease-like names, which suddenly, transfers them psychologically into the category of things that medicine is potentially able to deal with. So we've got Alzheimer's disease, we've got Parkinson's disease, we've got atherosclerosis and osteoporosis, anything that ends in osis, you're on solid ground, right? Fine, except that the problem is that even though then they become amenable to medical intervention and to, people approving the idea of throwing money at them and to develop such interventions, the problem is that then the interventions that people try to develop are interventions that address these particular so-called diseases individually. And that turns out to be drastically misguided. That is absolutely not the way that we are ever going to bring any of these so-called diseases under medical control. What we have to do is be more preventative and address the accumulating damage in the body, the molecular and cellular changes that the body does to itself throughout life that are initially harmless because the body's set up to tolerate a certain amount of them, but that eventually trigger these diseases and cause them to progress and to get progressively worse. Now, this is not a new idea. The whole field of gerontology was created on that basis more than a century ago, which is great. Unfortunately, that also took a bit of a wrong turn because people tried to be too preventative and to kind of manipulate metabolism to emulate long-lived species, and that just doesn't work because the creation of damage is just too inextricably intertwined with the things that our metabolism needs to do in order to keep us alive. But now, of course, we have the third approach, the approach that I started pioneering more than 20 years ago now, of damage repair, which is where the real progress is being seen, and especially where the real effort needs to be. So that, of course, is why at LEV Foundation we're doing this combination lifespan study in mice, where we're taking ways to repair various different types of damage and putting them together in the same mice at the same time to identify and optimize for synergy. And we certainly intend to be running a sequence of those experiments, but they're large, they're expensive, and they're very ambitious.
Large, expensive, ambitious. Yeah, it's so there's a lot of it. We talked about this before. If you just all of a sudden got a donation of like $10 million, like $1 million versus 10 million versus 100 million, these large, expensive experiments, do they just become like are you able to scale them better, or are they just like you can run multiple at a time and that would speed things up?
So a lot of that is the case, yes. So different experiments cost different things. There's a contrast here between the kind of experiments that we're doing at LEV Foundation now versus the kind that were the bread and butter of Sense Research Foundation. So at Sense Research Foundation, there are a bunch of projects being pursued in parallel that are really open-ended research. They are addressing particularly difficult types of damage, figuring out new ways to eliminate that damage. Fine, that needs to happen. But there are things that we never did work on Sense Research Foundation because we didn't need to. Namely, things that other people were working on because they were relatively low-hanging fruit, relatively easy to develop, but equally important, of course. And those are the things that we're focusing on combining in the experiment going on at LEV Foundation, because they are already individually demonstrated by other people to have some benefit in terms of mean and maximum lifespan in normal mice, even when you start the experiment in relatively late life, like middle age, when the mice are maybe 1.5 years old out of the total of 2.5 that your typical mice live to on average. So these are very two different phases, so to speak, in the development of any divide and conquer strategy. First of all, develop the components, then develop the best ways to combine the components. In terms of parallelizing and throwing more money at the problem, absolutely, this is very much an issue. In terms of the ongoing stuff on the really difficult types of damage, there's value in having money, but actually it kind of hits diminishing returns, because you've just got to assess what you've learned and figure out what to do next. I'm not saying it really has hit diminishing returns yet, but there's a limit to how much one can productively spend. Whereas on the experiments that we're doing at LEV Foundation, there's less of that. We could certainly run a couple more of these 1,000 mouse experiments right now if we had. I mean, they cost north of $3 million each. So, if we had that kind of money, then we'd certainly be doing that. The mice are available. We don't have to wait for the mice to get to 18 months old. We can buy them already pre-aged. So yeah, I mean, it's expensive, but it's doable, and it definitely is scalable.
Gotcha. And I know we want to talk about, I think it's probably a good piece to talk about AI here too. Is there anything you think the advances in AI? We got a lot of stuff going on that's like the hot new thing right now. And we saw with ChatGPT, amazing stuff happening, stuff that was just game changing. Do you think that would help maybe solve some of the manual work and speed progress up? Is that being applied to research?
It certainly is, yes. So, I mean, I want to highlight two different types of way in which it's being applied. One way is in biomedical research generally, not specific to aging. There are various things that we'd like to be able to do that would just speed everybody up. And of course, a couple of years ago, there was this enormous breakthrough that I'm sure everybody heard of called AlphaFold, this program that essentially solved the what's called the protein folding problem, the ability to predict and to describe the three-dimensional structure of a protein given only its amino acid sequence. This is a classic problem that's been around for decades, and people have made basically no progress at all. And then suddenly AlphaFold came along and blew it out of the water. There were things that AlphaFold still could not do a couple of years ago. And unfortunately, the most recent versions of AlphaFold are not publicly available, but you can bet your bottom dollar that it's even better now. And to continue that theme, one thing we'd like to be able to do, rather than being given an amino acid sequence of a protein that actually exists in nature, we'd like to be able to say, all right, we'd like a protein to be able to perform this function, let's say this enzymatic function. And in order to do so, we'd need it to hold some, let's say, some transition metal atom in this particular place, in this particular substructure within the protein. So how do we design a protein that will have that structure and will have that, and therefore have that function? And to, in other words, to go backwards, not starting from something that exists in nature. And that's the next hurdle, and I bet your life that DeepMind, among other people, are working on it right now. So then the other type of contribution that AI can make is more specific to aging. And here, I guess definitely the poster child, the market leader in this area is in silico medicine, led by my great friend Alex Voronkov. So at In Silico, they are absolutely using state-of-the-art machine learning techniques to develop small molecules, drugs that can address various aspects of aging, and including, of course, repurposing existing drugs, not just developing new drugs. And they're getting damn good at it. They've been able to announce the development of drugs for specific conditions with specific targets, developed in a small fraction of the time that it used to take. So again, this is the kind of thing that that we're going to be seeing over and over again. Certainly, there are plenty of other companies doing the same kind of thing.
Yeah, it's certainly hope we get some major progress out of using AI, machine learning, all that. We're solving all kinds of other problems. It just makes sense that it could be generally applied to, hey, the specific problem of, you know, whatever it is, whatever needs to be solved that takes a lot of either resources that aren't being smart about it, you know, as smart as, like, you know, AI can put stuff together, or it's just manual work, like automating that. And gosh, wouldn't it be amazing at problems you think that it could, oh, we need a decade to solve this because it takes all this work, and maybe AI makes it a year or something, or even less. That's
exactly, yeah, you got it. That's exactly what's going on.
That's amazing. That's very helpful too. Wow. I want to get to, there's a few questions in the chat. I'll get to those before we move on. One of them is very it's funny and interesting at the same time. I think it's definitely worth posing from our buddy here, a friend of the channel, Fast Abdul. Let me find it. So it says, since a person's ears and nose never stop growing, won't we all look like clown trolls in 250 years? Are there things that you know, once we solve the aging problem, are there things about our body that will need other adjustments to make, or are we all just going to like look very differently being hundreds of years old?
Yeah, so this is actually a very interesting question. More interesting than it might sound at first sight. It might sound like it's only humorous. And I'm going to answer it rather generally. So, of course, this classification of the types of damage that we accumulate into these 7 major categories that I put forward more than 20 years ago, you know, other people have come up with different classifications in the last decade, and they're not really different. In fact, you know, I still prefer mine, largely because the classification I came up with corresponds one-to-one with different damage repair strategies, generic approaches to actually eliminating the type of damage. And that's an aspect that I feel is critical. And, you know, people who've come up with these more recently, these hallmarks and pillars and so on more recently, have tended to overlook the need for that, which I think is a bit of a shortcoming. Nevertheless, the point here is, you know, is that classification comprehensive? And I've always said, well, probably not in the long term. In other words, eventually there's going to be things that accumulate in the body that accumulate so slowly that they are not problematic in terms of, you know, causing pathology, causing loss of physical or mental function in a currently normal lifetime. But once we fix all the things that are, and we consequently live a lot longer in a healthy state, you know, eventually those things are going to matter. Now, at this point, I feel there aren't very many of those things even on the radar, though, of course, we don't know what we don't know. But the idea that there is things that just carry on growing because they don't grow to a problematic level in, you know, currently normal lifetime is very much one such thing. You know, eventually we might look different, as you say. You know, in terms of things that look different, like how long your earlobes are or whatever, you know, who cares? You can have, you know, that sounds like pretty easy surgery to deal with that. But there is one case of that which has come to light over the past several years, and which I freely acknowledge really is something that we ought to consider as an 8th category. It's just that it's so off the wall that I don't really talk about it very much. So this is, again, something involving continuous growth, but it's something which appears to actually have pathogenic consequences in a currently normal lifetime. And that is the growth of the bone in an area up here somewhere called the cribriform plate, which is part of the skull, obviously, and which is supposed to have holes in it that the cerebrospinal fluid drains through. And this appears to be important in particular for minimizing the rate of accumulation of amyloid in the brain. And these holes basically shrink because the bone grows. And so there's a company that I work with a bit and whose CEO spoke in Dublin, Doug Ethel. The company's called Leucadia. And he's decided that reversing that problem could actually be a really powerful treatment for Alzheimer's. So he's the company is doing exactly that. They have a way of doing microsurgery on the cribriform plate. And I have to acknowledge that that is a type of damage that does not fit into any of the 7 categories that I've been talking about all this time.
Very interesting. Yeah, that's yeah. So if your ears and nose get too big, I'm sure plastic surgery will be very, very, probably advances will be there a lot easier, just another problem to resolve, except, maybe the stuff that's in the head, and otherwise we may have to figure that out. But it seems all just like a lot of cosmetic stuff, or just, hey, at that point, we probably already solved like all these problems 10 times. So they're going to be much easier to worry about. Definitely shouldn't, definitely don't think it'd be wise to take a position to not, to be scared of living longer because you may have other, auxiliary issues like that are clearly solvable. Okay. Wow.
Exactly.
Let's see. Mr. Chuck says, do you think someone is trying to gene editing or CRISPR to add mortality jellyfish tardigrade or hydra DNA into themselves?
I wouldn't be surprised, but I don't recommend it. The thing about DNA from other species is that it has co-evolved with the whole of the rest of the genome of those other species. And as such, there is absolutely no reason, by and large, to believe that a gene that some other species has, and that other species seems to be particularly good at not aging, would be good for us in anything like the same way. Now, there are some exceptions, though. So one thing that I'm particularly excited about right now is the way in which naked mole rats live so long. So many people have heard of naked mole rats. They live at least 30 or 40 years, despite being the same size as mice that live like 2.5 years, as I was mentioning earlier. And the reasons how they live so long are still very much an area of research. But my great friends, Vera Gorbanova and Andrei Salvanov in Rochester, figured out not long ago that that one really important area in this seems to be the way in which they make a particular chemical that exists both in them and in humans and in mice in the extracellular space. The compound is called hyaluronic acid. And the distinction with naked mole rats is that their hyaluronic acid it's bigger. It's a polymer, and it's just more subunits in naked mole rats than it is in any other species that's been looked at. And furthermore, it's broken down more slowly, so it lasts longer. And it appears that this has an impact on lifespan, especially on cancer. There are various potential mechanisms for how that could be. But anyway, so what Vera and Andrei did, and Andrei spoke about this in Dublin. So again, as I said, all the videos are up, so you can send your audience to the channel. What Andrei spoke about was how the incorporation of naked mole rat hyaluronic acid synthase into mice seems to be good for them. It only slightly extends their lifespan, but it very substantially extends their health span as measured in various ways. So we're very excited about this. That's the kind of signature, that kind of result where you get more benefit for health span than you do for lifespan is actually a signature, really, of something that postpones and probably repairs some aspects of aging, but not all. And therefore, it's the classic kind of thing that one might want to incorporate into a combination intervention experiment of the sort that we do at LEV Foundation. And it's very much on our list right now for the next study. So we're looking at various ways to do it. Of course, it would be supplied by gene therapy, whereas Vera and Andrei supplied it in the germline by standard transgenic means. And we're also looking at possibilities for slowing down the rate at which hyaluronic acid is broken down, because, as I say, the half-life seems to be an issue here as well. So that's still very much something that we are looking into the various alternatives for, but it's a very exciting example of what the questioner was talking about.
And if you want to see what naked mole rats look like, Google at your own risk. They are, I'm sure they're friendly. I'm sure they're lovable, but boy, they are something to look at. I won't show them on the screen for now, but very interesting study apparently. Thin Bear talks a diet-related question. I'd love to hear his opinion on a carnivore diet. Humans have been eating meat for hundreds of thousands of years before we invented agriculture. I've dropped all fiber, sugar, carbs, and seed oils. Haven't felt this good in decades.
Well, right, that's not a question. That's a report. And of course, this is not the first time I've met somebody who is on such a diet. But I've met people who are on absolutely every kind of diet you can imagine. And this really harkens back to what I was saying earlier about everyone having a different type of metabolism. So I'm quite sure there are plenty of people who have tried a carnivore diet and have found out that it doesn't agree with them, and they've stopped, of course, and they don't talk about it, right? Similarly, people who do an Atkins diet or a paleo diet or whatever, you have to, I approve of the idea of self-experimentation, at least within certain safe limits, because that's the way you find out what works for you. And so if Finn is the kind of person for whom a carnivore diet works, then knock yourself out. No, I'm certainly not saying don't do it.
I guess the broader question too is there a I think what David Sinclair talks a lot about, maybe fasting or correct me if I'm wrong. I just remember a lot of longevity folks tend to talk about fasting, eating less, all that type of stuff. Maybe the broader question is there a particular diet or just eating less that you think that I guess helps live longer or otherwise?
Yeah, so this is actually still a really hard question to answer. Of course, the phenomenon that rodents live a lot longer if you feed them less than they would like, that was discovered nearly a century ago. And it's by far the most studied phenomenon in the whole of the biology of aging. And just around the same time that I started pioneering the idea of damage repair, David started pioneering the idea of drugs that would trick the body into thinking you weren't eating very much when you actually are, so as to trigger the same kind of metabolic response. Because of course it is a metabolic response, right? What happens is that the body detects that it's short of calories and it adjusts its metabolic priorities in order to basically maximize evolutionary fitness. The simplest explanation for this is basically, if you're in an actual famine in the real world, you would kind of not want to have offspring because the offspring will starve to death before they have their own offspring. So it's better to shift priorities from growth and reproduction into maintenance and hunkering down and trying to outlive the famine. This is a very simple explanation. It's probably largely right, though there may be more to it. However, the point is that it has two consequences, one good and one bad. The bad one is that we're not going to expect to see anywhere near as big a benefit in long-lived species like humans as what we see in short-lived species like mice and rats, because simply long famines are less common in nature and therefore impose less selective pressure than short famines. And if you want to see more about the details of that argument, I wrote a paper on it called something like "The Unfortunate Influence of the Weather on the Rate of Aging." That was nearly 20 years ago. And anyone who needs to get a copy can always email me, of course. But yeah, that's the bad news. The good news is that it's not actually all that hard to find small molecules, to find drugs or supplements that do trick the body into thinking it's in a famine when it isn't. And of course, the benefit here is people like eating, and therefore it would be good if they didn't have to suffer the consequences. So David started out looking at a compound called resveratrol, which didn't really work out in the end, but it was a good starting point. And more recently, of course, David's been looking at NAD precursors, molecules that get turned into NAD plus. There are other things. Metformin is another example. It tricks the body in this way. It tricks it by a different molecular mechanism than what resveratrol or NAD supplements do, but that's fine. And again, rapamycin, probably the most successful CR mimetic. Again, I don't want to try to claim that these drugs are only CR mimetics, but that seems to be in all cases a substantial mechanism for how they give benefits in laboratory mice.
Very interesting. Wow. Another question here too. Aubrey, I'm sure you intend to be on Joe Rogan's podcast again. When will you be his guest again?
On Joe Rogan? I have
Yes.
no idea, to be honest. I mean, he has my email address, I'm quite sure. But yeah, a lot of people want to be on Joe's podcast. I very much hope he would like to have me back. I've certainly got lots more to say. I've been on twice in the past. Yeah, I think that's one of the links. Sure.
Yeah, shout out to Joe Rogan. If you're somehow listening to this, yeah, please have Aubrey back on as much as you would like to talk about this important issue. That would be great to keep watching the clips. A lot of great clips there. Just search for Joe Rogan, Aubrey de Grey. So very, very good. One more question, and we'll get back to the show notes here. Do mushroom supplements have a role to play in longevity? What's their contribution?
I've absolutely no idea, I'm afraid. That's a quick answer for once.
Gotcha. Yeah, I want to go to see, we talked about AI as well. There's a couple other community questions that I've got in the show notes, but I want to cover two. Talk about Richard for a moment. Richard been very, Richard, leader of your community, has been very vocal about wanting biotech, especially in the longevity sector, to be well funded. He's rumored to be a billionaire. A lot of other, we kind of hear billionaires talking about it every once in a while, or making investments in different ways strategically. Where I guess the question is like, where are they? Like, I don't want to like call out Peter Thiel, for example, because I know like Elon and all of them are making their different things, and Neuralink and otherwise. But when do you think this decade we'll start seeing people come out and say, hey, this stuff's important, I'm going to start investing in the sector? Is it just the capitalism part of like they just don't see it as profitable yet and they're waiting for that? Or do you think it's like that just the switch needs to flip in their brain of like, hey, we need to solve this sooner rather than later? What are your thoughts on that?
So of course it's very different for different people. So starting with Peter Thiel, who was my first major donor starting back in 2006, he's been extremely supportive, and I'm very much hoping that he will continue to be. He's one of those people who, he's very much an investor, temperamentally more than a donor, but he recognizes that you have to throw money philanthropically at these kinds of things in order to create the opportunities to invest, which is, of course, what he did for the first few years that he was supporting me. There are certainly other people who have come in who take the view that, philanthropy is not an efficient way to hasten technological progress. The Google twins, I think, are a good example of that. They were aware of my work starting in perhaps 2003, 2004. They never gave us a penny. And eventually they started Calico and they made a complete mess of it. But they decided they wanted to run a company, and they decided not to talk to the right people, which was a big mistake. Now we've got, of course, Altos Labs, which is a curious example because everyone is saying that the main funder, of course, the originator was Yuri Milner, but the main funder is said to be Jeff Bezos, but he's chosen to be completely quiet about it and not talk about it, which is very, very strange because he's certainly been known to be very interested in this field for at least 15 years since he met me at TED back in 2006. So it'd be quite nice if he were to come out and be a little bit more positive about it. But again, he decided to create Altos Labs as a company, even though Yuri Milner originally wanted it to be a non-profit. And so again, this may be for the same reason. I have higher hopes for Altos Labs than Calico, it must be said, because they've hired a lot of very, very good people, many of whom not only know their stuff, but also very much want to do something about aging. But outside of that, yes, as you say, there have been other people coming in philanthropically. And a lot of those people have been from the crypto community. Vitalik Buterin was the first. He started donating to Sense Research Foundation in 2017. Various other people in the Ethereum world, including James Fickle, have put quite a lot of money in. Various other crypto founders like Charles Hoskinson and Juan Benet, have been involved, and that is really fantastic news. But of course, Richard is a real outlier here in that he had this brilliant idea a couple of years ago of encouraging his flock to support this work, and that led to Sense Research Foundation receiving $27.5 million, which is fantastic. And I can only describe Richard as a complete hero. Someone told me it's his birthday tomorrow, so happy birthday, Richard! And
happy birthday, Richard!
Absolutely. So obviously I'm overjoyed at the love and the support for this whole field and for my work in particular that has come from the Hex community. And certainly, as I've already mentioned, there's no shortage of need for more of that. So even in this, crypto winter that we're in, very much hoping that that there will be some possibility for this. The foundation, of course, is a 501c3. Actually, we're still applying for C3 status, but we have a way around that. That means US taxpayers can still donate tax efficiently. And of course, any cryptocurrency is extremely welcome. So yeah, I mean, the crypto community has been fantastic. The Hex community has been particularly fantastic. And, the more I can do to reciprocate by coming on your show, coming on any other shows or anything or coming to conferences run by the Hex people. Of course, Maxi, Ellen has run a few of those I've been to. And so I'll be carrying on doing that very much.
Yeah, that just seems like one of the coolest things that could come of the success of crypto, or I guess the success of successful crypto investors, having more of them who are interested in longevity and anti-aging and solving these type of problems. Those people having money and then trying to put it towards things that they believe in and want to solve problems and being a force for good in the world, however they define it. If that goes into longevity, like I said, that's awesome. Like I really hope that, if nothing else, everyone being able to be the best version of themselves. And I talk about that a lot on the show. Like money doesn't buy happiness, doesn't buy all these things, but it can help you be the best version. It can help you solve problems you want to solve. And if you happen to be interested in some of the problems that you're solving, that just seems like a great way to get more money into the field, even without billionaires being super interested or super involved at the time. If we have a grassroots movement from the ground up, make lots of rich people who like longevity research, basically.
Well, absolutely. And of course, this also applies to the Dublin Declaration. The more crypto people sign up to that and start spreading the word, because of course the crypto community is very much a community. People listen to each other and respect each other's opinions. So we very much want as many Hexicans as possible, as many crypto people as possible to be signing up.
Yes, I will. I'll post that link in the chat as well. If you haven't signed up already, everyone, and I'll post it again near the end of the stream. That's something I signed it yesterday or so. I've searched the page for Hex. I haven't searched for PulseChain now. Search for Hex. Is at least one other person who's referenced that on there as well. So it's a great thing if you're interested and you believe in this stuff. I want to get to a couple community questions here too. One from Brent Nally. Shout out to Brent. May or may not be watching. If you're not watching now, he's watching the replay, I'm pretty sure. He asked, do you think cellular reprogramming is the best strategy to make humans biologically immortal?
There is no best strategy. Cellular reprogramming, partial reprogramming as it's usually called, is a really promising approach that is kind of being pursued as the central theme of the work being done at Altos Labs. And of course, the idea here is to do in vivo, in the body, essentially the same kind of thing that is done in cell culture to take regular cells, non-stem cells, and turn them back into stem cells, which was discovered in the mid-2000s by Shinya Yamanaka in Japan. The idea is if you do this in a very delicate partial way, you can achieve the rejuvenation and the re-stemification, if you like, of cells that are resident in the body, and thus improve the regenerative capacity of the body. And that's, it's got a lot of risks associated with it in terms of potential for enhancing cancer and so on. We definitely have not, in my view, come close to understanding how to manage those risks, but that's coming. That's definitely very important. But to call it the best strategy would definitely be wrong, because there is nothing in regenerative medicine or in damage repair that could ever be called the best strategy, simply because there's so many different types of damage that need different approaches to being repaired. In particular, if we look, for example, at the extracellular matrix, I was mentioning that earlier in relation to hyaluronic acid. The extracellular matrix accumulates a lot of different types of damage because it has very, very slow turnover. And that damage is very unlikely to be significantly attenuated or addressed by partial reprogramming. So we need to do something else as well. Similarly, for many other things, mitochondrial mutations, for example, or waste products. So very much part of the spectrum, but only part.
Gotcha. And got a question here from Monkey Magic. I'll post it here. Thoughts, optimal strategies on fasting for longevity-based current research. We covered that a little bit before as far as reduction or things that trick you into thinking that you're having less food to have a side effect as well. Any thoughts on fasting?
Yeah, well, so let's talk about fasting itself as opposed to our mimetics for a moment. So one thing that's become quite high profile in the past several years is intermittent fasting, as opposed to just eating a smaller number of calories each day than you normally would, doing so only on alternate days, for example. Walter Longo at University of Southern California is a particularly prominent researcher in that area, and it's got things going for it. Certainly, it appears to be beneficial in the same kind of way that calorie restriction itself is, and at least for many people, it may very well be easier to do than than regular calorie restriction. So again, it's something that your mileage may vary because different people are different, but it's definitely one of those things that are very valuable to try out and see whether it works for you. Bearing in mind, again, that because we have the misfortune to be long-lived species already, we are unlikely to get very much out of it as compared to what we see in short-lived organisms in the laboratory.
Because you talked about too, I just want to go back to metformin and other I don't call them therapies or ways to mimic these things happening without having to do calorie restriction and stuff. Is that it's almost like the easy pill, but like in a way that I don't know. There's this thought in my head around like in the future, we have all the maintenance therapies, but also is everyone taking these type of like therapies? Is it like a stack? Is it like a longevity stack almost? Is it one of those things you think in the future?
Well, I'm not quite sure I understand the meaning of the word stack here, but certainly what we will be doing is having a whole bunch of different things that are done to us all at the same time. Now, I'm hoping that by and large, those things will be supplied either orally in some cases or by injection. But that doesn't mean you have to have lots and lots of injections, in the same way that the MMR vaccine is not one vaccine, it's 3 vaccines in one injection. Similarly, you might have 300 things, stem cells and gene therapy and so on, all in one injection. But yeah, so I would hope that that's going to be basically how it is. Initially, there may not be we may not be able to do everything that way. So there may be need for, organ replacement, for example, for some organs that we just can't yet repair properly in situ, but that will be a temporary period, I'm sure, because there will be enormous efforts to render these things less invasive.
Okay, yeah, I was just thinking a stack in the form of like having different things that are targeting different pieces that are kind of like helping each other in that way. Like, oh, you can take these 3 things, or you can take these 7 things, like kind of depending on your own preference. Okay.
Yeah, that's definitely how it will be.
Sure. Got another question here from Kincaid Honey. Shout out to Kincaid Honey. Thoughts on cryonics?
Oh yeah, so I'm a well-known, long-time supporter of cryonics. I believe that it's an extremely important area of research. LEV Foundation put a substantial amount of seed investment into a company called Kinice very recently, which is pursuing a new way to do cryopreservation of organs and then eventually people that will very much reduce, well, the idea is that it will very much reduce the amount of damage that is done by the cryopreservation process, essentially by causing the cooling to happen very much faster, which minimizes the size of ice crystals, and also by avoiding fracturing, large-scale cracking, because cracks don't propagate through gas, basically, and this is a method involving pumping cold helium through the vasculature. But yeah, so there's lots more to do in cryonics. I'm a big supporter. I think that everybody should be looking at cryopreservation, at signing up for life insurance and so on for cryopreservation as simply in the same bracket as any other health insurance that you might have.
Well, very interesting. Yeah, there's cryonics, and there's so many different pieces. There's so many different like areas that are being tackled. As far as you have the maintenance therapies, you have cryonics. What about there's a question here on what thought about downloading brain consciousness and then uploading to robot? You know, Neuralink, those types of like transferring types of stuff. You know, what are your ideas on that?
Yeah, there's quite a lot going on in this area now. I've been following it for a little while. Neuralink, of course, Elon Musk's company, is one a group that are looking at how to have really high bandwidth brain-computer interfaces, which is essentially what you need in order to make uploading even something we can explore the possibility of. There's a group at Berkeley, Michael Mahabi's group, that have been looking at a wonderful technology they call neural dust, which is another way of doing the same kind of thing that that Elon's trying to do. There's another way that's come along more recently that I'm very excited about, and which is being pursued by someone that many people on this show will have heard of, Brian Johnson. Brian Johnson's main claim to fame right now is that he spends a large amount of money, $2 million a year, on his health, and he's been talking about this and spreading the word about how he does this, and generally leading by example in the context of a company that he's created called Blueprint. But the thing I'm talking about, I want to talk about today, is nothing to do with Blueprint. He has another company, it's called Kernel, Kernel, that is, again, looking at very high bandwidth brain-computer interfaces. But in his case, it's done without any surgery or without injecting anything into the brain. He's created this wonderful thing, which is basically a wearable functional MRI machine. So it does magnetic resonance imaging, but it does it in, you know, a very much more manageable way, very much lower cost. These machines, you know, the unit cost will be substantial initially, and so his first customers are going to be Big Pharma, because this can be used to very much speed up drug testing for neurological conditions. Yeah, Kernel is a really exciting technology company. They've got working prototypes of these things. I happen to know that Brian is looking for investment right now. He's got a bridge round open, which is only looking for like $5 million. And I very much encourage anyone who's interested in knowing more about this and perhaps contributing to that round to email me, and I will be able to put them in touch with Brian, because that would be very handy.
Gotcha. Let me. You mind if I post your email in the chat just so people can see?
I would be outraged if you don't.
I will definitely do that. Yeah, it's. I love how you're very accessible too. For, you know, you're on Twitter, email. A lot of people who are just solving these type of big problems just aren't accessible in that way. And I love the fact that you're out here communicating us and talking to us like this.
Well, thank you. Yes, I've always tried to do things that way. I feel, you know, I've always gone into this with a humanitarian motivation, and therefore, you know, doing the research is all very well, but you've also got to get the word out and educate people. And, you know, I seem to have been able to make a contribution in both of those ways. So I'm absolutely committed to carrying on doing them both.
You're doing excellent with it. It's kind of unbelievable, honestly, that you have you not only have the you know, research skills, you have the marketing skills, you have the personability. Yeah, I think I said this before too. I think you're the right man for the job, for sure. And many people who hopefully will see and be inspired by your work, and have already, you know, we've already had plenty of people in the field working on it, but can only imagine the compound interest that this type of interaction is going to generate.
Well, thank you for that. I mean, I wouldn't want to push back on saying that I'm the right man for the job. For me, it very much takes a village. You know, it's the diversity of people out there, both in terms of their skill sets and in terms of the way they say things, that, you know, will get through to the maximum amount of audiences and give the maximum amount of speed.
Well, I'll say you have the best beard. How about that? You show, you're like, it looks like you've lived a long time. Like that's
yeah,
kind of like a cool
George Church might have something to say about that, but I'll take it.
Yes, sir. I want to wrap up on this too, and just maybe if there's anything you want to take us out on as far as things to be excited about, or, you know, I put I'll also post for people to sign the declaration as well if you're interested. You know, the DoubleLongevity.declaration.org. But just for people, if they're wondering, they're new to this, or they're just like kind of like, hey, what can I do to help? I want to have utility. I want to be valuable in the community. Whether it's, you know, creating content, or whether it's donating directly, or otherwise, creating conferences or attending conferences, how can people help when they feel like, hey, this is a problem they want to help solve?
It all depends on what you're good at that not many other people are good at. Well, the declaration doesn't depend on that. Absolutely everybody needs to sign the declaration. So sign it now and get everyone you know to sign it as well. The more people we have, the better. So that's really important. But yeah, in terms of everything else, all of the above, really, you know, run conferences, come to conferences, run podcasts, view podcasts, talk to people, get the word out. That's the most important thing. Of course, if you're a scientist, if you're a biologist, get into important areas. If you want links to the community, you know, write to me. There's a wonderful organization called Less Death that now that I was able to get going and seed fund a year or more ago now, which runs retreats in which people are brought together to do exactly this, not only to learn stuff, but also to meet each other and form consortia and you know, collaborations. It's working amazingly well. It's really kind of scaling the work that just, you know, that I've been trying to do on my own all these years. Yeah, when people write to me and say, how can I help? I try to introduce them to the right people. So Less Death, go there, lessdeath.org. It's a fantastic organization run by two amazing people in this field.
Amazing. We'll get to one more question real quick before we get out, because this is kind of related to the Neuralink too. And this is something Richard talked about. Like Richard said, oh, you are the meat. You know, he doesn't believe in the Neuralink type of research as well, which I've always found interesting. And you know, yeah, I guess what are your thoughts on that versus?
Yeah, we also don't know. I think we can say that the memory isn't in the meat, because memory, kind of by definition, is like, you know, stuff that we can actually articulate in words and, you know, in bits. But whether there's other aspects of consciousness, well, of sentience, shall we say, that are simply required to be made out of meat rather than made out of silicon, we just don't know, and we won't know until we try. So basically, you know, the idea is to use brain-computer interfaces to essentially train an external silicon thing to have all the information and to be able to do the processing that a regular meat-based brain does, and then like see the extent to which it can substitute for the existing brain. And we just won't know until we try.
Very interesting. I can see you run the experiment, everything's done, we got everything hooked up, and it's like, oh, nothing happens. Oh, it is in the meat, or the other way around. It's like, oh my gosh, we have a human who's a robot, but everything works fine. Like testing that, and that's very exciting just to see what happens. So,
and finally, happy birthday again to Richard.
Happy birthday, Richard. You know, honestly, I kind of forgot it was. I think it is October 9th.
Yeah,
that does sound correct to me. Yeah, and I'm the maximalist, and I even forgot that. So thank you for reminding me. I appreciate that.
All right. Yeah. Great.
Thank you again for coming on the show. It's been fantastic. Again, I hope you have you on again to get some more updates too. Everyone in the chat enjoyed it. Had a lot of great questions. Appreciate everyone in the community showing up here and give me some questions beforehand too. And we love the work you're doing. And yeah, like you said, there's a lot of people in the Hex community, Richard, of course, too, big fans. You know, you are a hero to a lot of people as well. So thank you so much for everything you do. It's
my pleasure. Thanks for having me on the show.
Of course. Everyone out there at Scivive and 5555 and Dublin Longevity Declaration.org. Sign the pledge if you're up for living longer and doing cool stuff like that. All right, everyone. That's all we got for you today.